today, you know what, guys, we're so happy that you are here. We are going to talk about an exceptional topic, which is a piggyback from our launch event last week on our Lost Opportunities report, but we're going to go deeper. There's nothing like research being experienced on paper, and today we're going to lift that experience from the paper and take you, our node attendees, into a deeper perspective on the importance of working women who are leading in our economic development industry. We have 4 exceptional, beautiful women who are strong, and we're going to hear them roar this morning, who are living real world experience of this research. But before we go deeper, I want to really highlight Sondra Palivoda, who was Team NEO's research associate leading this research for our Lost Opportunities report. And she will help to lead our panelists in a great discussion this morning. Then we're going to hear from Abbey Bemis, Executive Director of Erie County Economic Development Corporation, one of our panelists, Camille Bellops, secondary panelist, Senior Director, Project Management Team NEO, and absolutely in no particular order, but last not least, Erica Fitzpatrick, our Program Manager for Industry, Innovation, and Team NEO. Ladies, let them hear your roar this morning. I'll turn this over into the capable hands of Sondra.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. Just bear with me while I share my presentation. We're going to go through some of the highlights of the Lost Opportunities report. Just to touch on, like we did in the launch event, I had some opening remarks, and that was just to touch on the title itself, Lost Opportunities. We wanted to show the audience and to have it at the forefront of their mind that so while opportunities were lost during the pandemic because of the hundreds of thousands of women who did leave the workforce towards the middle and the end of 2020, there are opportunities to bring and strengthen back the workforce, especially in our region, but in the country overall. So this report does look at the pandemic's impact on Northeast Ohio's working women. And it is a part of our series, Aligning Opportunities, which looks at the supply and demand mismatch in the region. And the supplement to Aligning Opportunities last year, Misaligned Opportunities, which showed the racial inequalities as it related to that supply and demand mismatch in in-demand jobs in the region. So these topics aren't separate. They are all interchangeable and they all do intersect. So while I talk about some of those intersections throughout the report, please feel free to submit any Q&A questions. We will either address those after the presentation or after the panelist discussion. So this overview will look at some of the historic data, some of COVID's impacts on women in the region and nationally, Northeast Ohio women's representation in industries and occupations, as well as some of the case studies that we highlighted in the report. There will be a couple of things that I don't touch on in this presentation, but that are readily outlined in the report. So I encourage anyone, if anyone has not been able to read the report, please do so after the node meeting today, sometime when you're available. So we first took a look at the historic labor force participation rate of women, and then how that intersected with the national gender wage gap. So from 1940s and on, the labor force participation of women did increase, and the gender wage gap did persist. There are historically a lot of jobs that women were left out of for a long period of time, but we have been making gains steadily over the decades. We did take a look at Northeast Ohio's gender wage gap, and this showed about a 23% decrease, or 23% less wages earned by women than men in the region throughout 2019. And so this was survey data that was gathered about after 5 years. The 5-year estimate is a very a much more reliable source. So this gender wage gap is an average over time, but as we can see from labor force participation and from the number of hours worked by women in the region, make up over 45% of all hours worked in the region. So that gender wage gap is a little bit concerning. But prior to the pandemic, when that gender wage gap has existed and persisted, women had been making strides in leadership roles, in vice presidential and C-suite roles, gaining percentages. We also took a look at how the gender wage gap intersects with educational attainment by gender. And so this was a particularly concerning graph as we were developing the research, because at each level of education, women were making a substantial amount less than men. We will love to, in the future, take a look at over time how these have compared. And we'll look forward to really analyzing this to see how women have made gains and when these gaps start to get closer or further apart as it relates to what's happened in society. So with the pandemic, we'll see a lot of interesting data over the course of the next 2 to 3 years that will really show us how women coming back into the labor force or leaving the labor force really affects the entire region. We also looked at how the breakdown of households really affects your region's competitiveness, strength, or impacts from the pandemic. So if you're in a region with a very high percentage of married couples, a high percentage of single women or single men with children or without children, how is your region more impacted by COVID or not? Do you need to be paying attention to certain areas of the workforce or not? And so this is where our intersection with misaligned opportunities will likely fall, because the effects of the pandemic have been especially hard for people of color and for single parents of color. So we'll be hopefully taking a deeper look per data available in our next iteration of misaligned opportunities. But I mean, over 34% of jobs lost in, I think, September of 2020 were primarily Latina women. About out of 870,000 women, 870,000 women, 34% of those were Latina. So there is a very large gaps in where women are feeling the impacts of COVID-19 and how that intersects with industries and occupations, as we'll take a look at later on. One other graph and metric that I want to stress is the working population below the poverty line. And so these are people who are working long hours, tough jobs, and are still designated below the poverty line. And that's a metric that's really important, because there's a national conversation around how the pandemic's effects on schools, on wages, on as it relates to layoffs or opportunities could force more working women into poverty. Women's representation in Northeast Ohio industries, this was where the research team was really interested in how past recessions primarily affected male-dominated industries like construction, manufacturing, et cetera. And the pandemic really just hit a lot of the women-dominated industries. While healthcare, there was shortage of personnel, PPE. The impact to the mental health of healthcare workers. We have about 80% of women, 80% of the healthcare and social assistance in Northeast Ohio is comprised of women. And between healthcare, accommodation and foods and education, there's more than 70,000 jobs lost in those 3 industries alone, which are in the top 5 of most female represented industries. In occupations, we have healthcare support, healthcare practitioners, and technical as the top 2 highest female represented occupations. And I bring this specific graph in to say we looked at the median earnings of these occupations and where they fall in line with the percentage of women in occupations. So I've circled in red here. These are the top 6 highest represented occupations for women. so that healthcare practitioners and technical occupation, that healthcare support, those two are the two highest occupations with the most women, and they are interestingly enough both at the lower spectrum of pay of median earnings per year and the higher section of median earnings per year. So all this to say that there are, while there are opportunities in the healthcare field for high earning jobs or high earning opportunities, there are a lot of these jobs that employ a lot of women that do not pay enough. They're in these lower, higher represented with women and lower paying median income. So in future series of this Lost Opportunities Report, we're definitely going to dive deeper into the specific occupations within healthcare, manufacturing, and IT that really pose an opportunity for women to earn higher. And with that, with aligning opportunities, misaligned opportunities, and now this, we really stress on where is the supply of healthcare, manufacturing, and IT in the region, because these are driving industries with a lot of earning potential and a lot of innovation and support from various businesses and organizations. And here we look at the gender breakdown of these three in terms of what educational institutions are, or what educational programs are graduating the most men or the most women, and where is the opportunity for women. And so we found here almost 80% of all healthcare completions in Northeast Ohio were completed by women. And that's no small feat, but there are a lot of reasons why women go into healthcare and maybe why some men don't. But we need to take a deeper look at why it is that men and women are encouraged to go into healthcare or encouraged to go into manufacturing or IT. And with less than a third of women in both manufacturing and IT completions in the region, there's real opportunity there to encourage women into these fields that have very high earning potential as well. Lastly, we outline in the report these 5 case studies that are connecting women with opportunities, but that are also providing a network of support. YWCA has been a equitable model for workers and for providing support to women in the region. Years ago, they instituted a $15 an hour pay. Over 5 years, they've just been looking at their policies to be the equitable model for others in the region. During COVID, they eliminated restrictions for PTO to give their workers more opportunities to take time to themselves, to attend to loved ones, family, for workers with kids. And they also really advocate for true universal childcare to unburden that cost of people who are trying to get on their feet, to get higher paying jobs, and then to also still be able to afford that childcare for their children. Tri-C's Women in Transition program, before the pandemic, they served about 350 women annually, and help with things like computer literacy and counseling for women who are trying to re-enter the workforce through an educational program. And they really do empower these women as they journey to rejoin the workforce, whether that was from personal or professional reasons. The women in transition are really supported by Tri-C. Engage Cleveland they have a couple of things that they do. Their Next Generation event is an all-day women's event that grew by 50% during COVID, because they had the e-infrastructure to bring people back online. And women, really professional women especially, definitely were looking for the support and the guidance during this time. They also have a survey of young professionals that has been helpful in seeing what are young professionals feeling, thinking, doing in the region. They also host a women's mentorship program that has seen about 56 mentors and or 56 mentees and 16 mentors throughout the year, encouraging women to advocate for themselves in those professional settings. How do you ask for that raise? How do you ask for that new job title? That mentorship is crucial to helping women along the helping women advance in their current careers. Girl Scouts of America, or Girl Scouts of Northeast Ohio, they have been encouraging young girls into the STEM field through some of their STEM programming, and partnering with America Makes, talking about or covering additive and 3D printing manufacturing. So they're trying to help girls at a young age get interested and encourage them to look at these fields that offer a lot of growth. S3 Technologies we also highlight because they are a women-owned tech specialist firm in Northeast Ohio, who has just provided an enormous amount of flexibility for their staff during COVID, as well as they offer a pretty clear vertical path from entry level into management positions. So they are always looking for the opportunities for their entry level workers. And that's very critical during a time when people are looking for advancement opportunities to get more stability from after seeing all the instability of the pandemic. So I leave everyone here with some core messages, and that is centered a lot around the full labor force participation, increasing our competitiveness and increasing your county, your city, your region's competitiveness, and as well as how women can thrive when when concerns or the challenges from COVID have been taken into account. Especially if you have a lot of problems with retention, those looking at the policies that you have for advancement opportunities is really important, and could strengthen the workforce you do have, and strengthen the relationship that you have with new people coming with attracting new talent. We also stress the better promotion of opportunities for women in manufacturing and IT. Is one of the factors that will need to increase our competitiveness as a region outside of full labor force participation. But to check out a little bit more in the report, we have more information on educational attainment of women, in-demand occupations, and how women are represented in them, as well as something I didn't touch on, but the business ownership part of lost opportunities, and how the COVID's impact on entrepreneurship and women in business definitely has taken a hit. But before the pandemic, women really were making strides in business ownership and in new fields in business. So these are some other critical parts of the Lost Opportunities report. Lastly, introducing our panelists: Abbey Bemis, Executive Director of Erie County Economic Development Corporation; Camille Bellops, Senior Director of Project Management at Team Neo; and Erica Fitzpatrick, Program Manager of Industry Innovation at Team Neo.
So Sondra, before you begin, I've got a question here in the chat with your panel. Did you break down the wage gaps aligned with occupation, i.e. union occupations such as law enforcement, which equalize salaries? Was that broken down? Wage gaps by occupation?
No, that is definitely something to consider for the future. I would say we did have a hard time finding some gendered wage, the breakdown of wages by each occupation by gender. So we do have access to those the gaps between occupations, but not necessarily the gaps between genders in occupations. That may be something that will be provided in the future, hopefully by the U.S. Census or by some other BLS. And if anyone happens to know a source that I might not be aware of, please feel free to drop that in the chat as well.
Yes, and the slides will be available via an interactive copy of the report that will be sent out following this meeting. That was the last question.
Excellent. So I think now is as good a time as any to dive into the panel discussion questions. We've assembled these professionals here in economic development to share some of their insights on the importance of women in economic development. Abby, if we could start with you, make a brief introduction, and then to Camille and Erica.
Very good. Hi, everybody. My name is Abbey Bemis. I'm the Executive Director of the Erie County Economic Development Corporation out in Sandusky, Ohio. I am an Ohioan, have lived here for almost 10 years now, grew up actually in New Jersey. My background is in business, economics, and international studies. And I think relevant for today's discussion, I am one of 4 girls in my family. And I also work with a fabulous group of women at Erie County Economic Development. Glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. Camille Bellops. I was looking at the attendee list and see a lot of familiar faces. Senior Director at Team NEO. I have been here now for 12 years and have had opportunity for a variety of positions and learning a lot of different things. My background is actually economics and finance. I had the privilege to be an investment banker in New York and Dallas before I moved to Ohio. And unfortunately, I'm an only child, so I have no siblings. I get to be the girl, which has its pros and cons. And we are transplants to Ohio, but have made Ohio home.
Good morning. My name is Erica Fitzpatrick. I'm the program manager for industry and innovation for our innovation clusters here at Team NEO. So I joined Team NEO in August of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. So that's been a really interesting experience. My background is mostly in nonprofit work and workforce development. So it's been interesting to enter into a more manufacturing focused area and learn more about what's going on in there. I'm a Clevelander for almost all of my life, aside from a few years when I went away for college. So I love Cleveland, and I love to see, you know, what we're doing in the region, and the more we can do to uplift women in the region, the better.
Thank you all for the introduction. Our first question was going to be about the report, about first reactions to the report. And I wanted to start with Abby as a non-Team NEO economic development professional. Was there anything that surprised or concerned you, or was probably top of mind during the pandemic and as a working professional?
Yeah. I mean, so you've been reading about this topic, I think, in national headlines. It's striking when you start to see some of the statistics. I found the report really interesting to see it broken down in our region, how that matters. I think one of the things that stood out to me most, you touched on in your slides, this idea that this disparity exists despite different education backgrounds. To me, that becomes more of an industry issue, which I know has already been brought up today in the chat. And I think what I loved about that is that becomes really actionable for us in economic development. Things like the work you're doing around aligning opportunities, and then us as practitioners getting that in the hands of people who guide career choices. It all of a sudden takes a really complex problem and makes it a little bit less scary to get through some of those barriers.
Camille or Erica, anything to add?
I was really not surprised, which is interesting because I think we've known this specifically around the wage gap. I don't think anyone looking at that was necessarily shocked, but I was still saddened by the fact that we seem stuck. There has not been a level of incremental change, even though I think there's a level of awareness of the problem. And so one of the things that made me want to stop and think is what's my personal role in helping this so that my first grade daughter is not having the same conversation when she enters the workforce, because it is a huge financial disadvantage based on this data to be a woman, because your lifetime earnings are just going to be significantly lower, right? And how does that put you in a position to build wealth, to help be a part and contributor, or even being the main breadwinner for your family, to then, as we talk about poverty, I mean, the through lines for this data in a lot of ways just felt very personal, and how can we help, right? And so I have no problems having a challenging situation. I'm just hoping that we're having a different conversation in 20 years. I don't want to be having this exact same conversation. That's what feels unacceptable to me.
I would say I was surprised that I wasn't surprised by the data. You know, it's like Camille said, we've been seeing this data over the past few years, and it hasn't changed. But I was happy that there's more being done. So, you know, putting a report together like this in general, we're at least talking about it. And I think mostly this topic goes overlooked because it's just the way it's been. And, you know, nobody has solutions, and nobody's really looking into it for how do we fix it.
Thank you all for those reflections. Each of you has expertise in your fields and your experiences, and so we have some questions specifically tailored to each of your experiences. Camille, so starting with you, you've had experience economic development in various markets, and at the report's launch event, we heard from Kim Riley about the lack of women in leadership positions in the insurance industry. As the Senior Director of Project Management, what has women's representation been like in your field, in your experience?
So economic development, I think, is actually very similar to Kim's position on insurance. I think at that entry level and mid-level position, you do see a lot of women. I mean, investment banking is the total opposite. I would be, in many cases, the only woman in many boardrooms that I entered, or just in many settings. That's not the case typically on the ED side. The companies we visit, whole other conversation. On the economic development side, there are a lot of women entering the field, which I think is marvelous, right? But what you don't see, and I'm not sure why, I mean, the data will be interesting to look at, is when you're looking at or the decision makers, just looking around our own region, Abbey gets to be a unicorn in a lot of ways, because there are very few CEOs that are female. It's definitely just not representative of the population. And so our industry still suffers, right, from, unfortunately, not having some work to do. We definitely have progress that we can make. And as with a lot of other industries, there seems to be a breakdown between the entry level and senior management. Now, we're fortunate because we have the pool of people. So how can we actively look internally at all these, as these organizations look to promote, as these organizations look to foster talent, how do we get more Abbeys? Abbey, I'm using you as the unicorn. So how do we get more Abbeys? How do we get more Bethanys? You know, how do we, and as the organizations get larger, candidly, the numbers drop even further, right? So for the very large organizations, how do we get more decision makers that are women?
Actually, that's a great segue into a question we have for Abbey, which is, what are the unique assets or unique perspectives that you provide to the company as a woman CEO?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to assess that myself, but I'll give it a shot. And I did just want to comment on Camille's points. I think that can't be underlined enough about our industry. What we do every day, we're trying to build an economy and a community, and the fact that we aren't a manifestation of what we desire for our communities and our economy, it's a pretty big disconnect for me. So I love that we're talking about this even within a small field, and as an illustrative example of why it's important. But So I'll make some generalizations about females in the workplace. You all are here to participate in this dialogue, so I think you'll forgive me for that. And I know there's nuances to this, but I think women in economic development, there's sort of two things that stand out to me. One is we love helping people. So you see that in that industry data that you shared. A lot of those sectors where we're overrepresented you're serving people in those sectors. And I think we're doing that in economic development in a different way. And second, women, we tend to be problem solvers, right? Like how many of you dealt with something at home this morning, kid needs something, they go to mom, right? So both of those things, I think, play really well in economic development. We're problem solving all day long. And I think the idea that we do it because we like to help people means that we can sort of remove some ego or barriers in how we get a problem solved. And for me, I think that's played well. Probably took me too long to learn that I always just wanted to get the job done versus make sure that I got credit or we got credit as an organization. And I think women are probably too good at that at times, but it's a skill.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. So a question for Erica. At Team Neo, you work on the innovation team, including manufacturing and other additive and technology-driven sectors. What have you seen any trends in manufacturing organizations that have tried to help encourage women to come into the field?
Yes, I mean, we know across the board manufacturing is struggling in talent, right? So that's the one thing we hear from every single manufacturing company we talk to is that they don't have enough people to come in and work. And I think mostly they're thinking men on the floor. So I have seen some organizations that I think are great and helpful. There's women in manufacturing, women in 3D printing. And I think these organizations are really great for the women who are already in the field, for helping them kind of lift up and go to higher levels within the organizations. But I think we need to just start younger. So we see that in our emerging talent work is, if we're waiting until college to introduce students to manufacturing, it's too late. They've already made a decision about what they want to do. So we need to be, hitting the students in 6th through 12th grade, talking about manufacturing, talking about what these career opportunities are, specifically talking to women, young women, and saying, hey, these opportunities are for you also. I remember being in a high school for another job that I was working in workforce development, and we were talking about a program at Swagelok for engineering for high school students. So to come in once a week and learn about engineering from the engineers at Swagelok. And I can't tell you how many young women came over to the table when I asked them about, do you want to sign up for the program? And they were like, oh, this isn't for me. Just because that's what's been told to them, that, manufacturing, engineering, that's not for them, that's for the boys. And so I think we need to just start the message younger, that it is for you. There are opportunities. Women are really great at math. I know, Sondra, we've talked about this, is that, keep doing math because it's going to help you get where you're going. But if we're telling our own kids like, oh, that's hard, you might not want to do that. We can't encourage the kids by telling them it's not for them. So that's mainly what we have to do, is just start younger.
Just to stay with the manufacturing industry for a second, have you seen any trends about how women have entered the field or made strides in our region's manufacturing industry itself?
From my perspective, what I've seen is a lot of women who are at high levels in manufacturing companies are there because it's a family company, right? Maybe they've inherited it. Maybe they've just moved up through the ranks because they've grown up in it. But we're not seeing as many women who are just starting their own manufacturing company or who are buying a manufacturing company. So that's, at least from my perspective, what I see.
Well, but I guess to that point and the point you were making before, when you're in a culture that promotes staying in the manufacturing or learning or striving for more in that industry, it's not that women don't like manufacturing. It's that it can be a cultural thing too.
Absolutely. And they just don't know. They don't know what's out there.
Yeah. So in the family business, they also have role models, right? Show someone that they have close to them who is. Mhm.
It's funny, just to add to that, Sondra, it's amazing how effective it can be in working when it does work. If you get a company who has a strong female labor force, the multiplier effect, we have a company locally that does some pretty innovative staffing models, part-time primarily, but still offers a lot of benefits. And they try to structure around school schedules. So they got a lot of women to take those positions in their manufacturing plant. And you all know, you hit one jackpot of women community members, told hundreds. So their labor force is primarily women now. I just love that it can work to our favor if you create the right culture.
Abbey, you just touched on something that was pretty important during the pandemic, which was flexibility, especially when it comes to the different schedules affected by school closures and childcare closures. Camille, this question would be for you. You have two small kids at home, and you've had them during the pandemic, during those school closures. How did you manage this? And have you seen anything, seen any models that help women with children stay in the workforce?
Let me start by saying that for all the working moms or folks dealing with elder care, I see you, I acknowledge you. I have more gray hairs too. I wanted to stop and just say that because I have to admit, all jokes aside, this has been one of the hardest years of my life. This convergence of dealing with my mom, dealing with my kids, dealing with work, and not having that separation and work at the same time kind of blowing up, because I don't know, for us, as things were closing, it feels like clients were reaching out more with questions. So we had this boom in business too, right? And a need for help at the same time that we're also trying to deal with me getting on YouTube trying to figure out basic math because I'd forgotten and my kid keeps asking me questions. So that convergence, I never want to do again. But I see you, just if anyone else was experiencing that. That being said, I thought about this a lot, and I was very lucky. I had 3 important things that made my life possible. Not easier, just possible. I was privileged enough to be in a position in which I didn't have to show up at a job every day. I could do my job on this computer, right? And I have to acknowledge that a lot of people did not have that. So that was privilege number 1. Privilege number 2 was Christine Nelson, and privilege number 3 was Team Neo. And I call these 3 things out in order because I had a boss and an organization that understood that I needed support and that the work hours the typical work hours from 8 to 5 could start at 6 and could also happen at 8 o'clock at night, right? Without these 3 components of not having to show up for a job in person and having support at both this direct report level and also an organizational level. I am not new. I mentioned I've been doing this for 12 years, but I thought about, do I need to step back? Do I need to exit the workforce? Because at one point I was like, there's literally, not figuratively, I cannot do this. I cannot do this. And without that backup or the ability to go raise my hand and wave the right flag sometime, or just have the flexibility to do some of the things I needed on weekends, or the flip side of that, owning the fact and giving myself some grace when I had a very important meeting that I just needed to focus on, and dropping my kid's school and recognizing I was being a bad mom in that moment, right? And being like, I can't help you. You're gonna have to figure out Zoom on your own. All these things coming together at one time, but none of it would have been possible without those 3 things I mentioned at the beginning. So when I look at other women who may not have been in that same position, if any one of those 3 things was off, what'd you do? You had to take a step back and re-entering the workforce, as this data shows, is not easy for women. And so we're losing income from the wage gap, and we lose income whenever we re-enter the market. So I'm trying to be hopeful, y'all. This is just depressing, and this really highlights, right, the issue. It really does. And so there was no balance. There was juggling. Sometimes I just threw things directly on the floor and let them break and came back and picked them up later. But as I said, shout out to Christine Nelson. So that's all.
Yeah, and I just want to call out that we have a lot of good comments in the Q&A and the chat. So if you haven't been able to see those, take a look. Abby, this next question is for you. In the report, we talked about the rates of women's entrepreneurship and how we can encourage or support more women in business. You had mentioned the Rise Entrepreneurship Program. If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So in Erie County, we run a program called Rise, the Regional Incubator for Sustainability and Entrepreneurship. We actually work with a lot of ESPs in Northeast Ohio, like Glide and Jumpstart, to deliver services to entrepreneurs in our area. And we do so without an industry focus and sort of at every stage of development. The experience we've had with entrepreneurship and the data that was shared in this report, it's very similar. So if you look at where women are participating in industries, it's also where they're creating businesses in our experience. And so they were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, hair salons, childcare centers, things like that really couldn't adapt as well as other workplace settings. It did unfortunately impact them. So we've done a couple things to try to correct for that in our market. We actually just launched what we call a minority business recovery grant. And I would encourage my economic development peers on the call to take a look at that, possibly with your new COVID funding coming to communities. It's small business relief, but we specifically targeted racial and female minority owned businesses. And we did that because that's what the data shows. You know, those persons in our community were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So what easy on-ramp can we give them to get back to their full capacity for their business? Because it's a lot like you as an individual. If you had to take a leave, how do we get you back to the workplace faster, stronger, in an understanding manner? And our grant program was designed to do that. And we've gotten really good reception. And the other thing I love about working with female entrepreneurs, like I've said before, you reach one and you support them well. They are very coachable and they are really willing to share with one another. So it's been pretty amazing to see some of them come back with a vengeance and bring 10 friends to our program. And I also want to give a shout out to Sarah Ross, who works with us, who manages Rise on a day-to-day basis. She's a rock star, and our clients tell us that all the time.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Abby. We've got just a couple more questions, and I think we've touched on the essence of these throughout the previous presentations and answers. But the first of two would ask, did you have a mentor during any period of your career, of your education? And maybe how did that impact you to be where you are today?
I guess I can start. So I've had a few women who I've worked for that have been great mentors. And I felt very, very fortunate, who've really pushed me to explore options, to, actually leave the organizations that I was with for better opportunities. And that has, just meant the world to see a woman who wants to help me get further, and sometimes further than they were. So that's been really great. I will also say that I have worked for women and worked with women who didn't want to take on that role and didn't want to do that uplifting. And I don't know if it's seen as competition or seen as, well, if I help you, then how can I get further? So I think that's one of the kind of unfortunate side effects of the workplace that we see is that women aren't always willing to uplift each other. But I know for me, that's something that I look forward to in the future is to mentoring. I'm actually a big sister for the Big Brother Big Sister Association. And so I look at every opportunity that I can spend with my little sister as an opportunity to tell her, you know, here's what's out there for you, and encourage her to try new things and to go further than she thought she could. So I hope to continue to do that professionally in my career also.
I agree with those points, Erica. I've had similar experiences. I guess I would add to that, when we were talking about mentorship, the people that immediately came to my mind for my own career were all males. And since then, I've thought about it a little bit more, and there are women in my professional network who were definitely allies and advocates for my career. They tend to approach it differently than males. And I think generally a lot less publicly. So, you know, they'll speak to me privately, or I know they will approach, you know, other board members about me and be an advocate. But for whatever reason, at least in my experience, my male mentors, they're willing to say that in a room. You know, she's great. We need to do X, Y, Z to support her. So I loved earlier, Camille, like the shout out you gave to Christine Nelson. I think we should all get more comfortable at doing that and make sure we're doing that actively, publicly, wherever we can.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I just think credit's due when credit's due, period, male or female. And we should all get better about doing that to the people in our lives, especially over this last year. Sometimes you just needed to hear, you know what, I see you and doing a good job. Candidly. So, yeah.
Just to echo on a couple of those points, and especially the point you just said, Camille, which was it doesn't matter male or female. A mentor is a mentor, and often when somebody has a vastly different experience than you, that mentorship's only going to be that much more enriching. So and shout out to Camille herself, my mentor. So thank you all ladies for being here. I think we could wrap up with the last question, which is also, you know, about encouraging women to join different fields. Is there anything at the top of your mind that you think should be outside of maybe encouraging younger girls to join a career in economic development or in manufacturing, and why it's important to encourage them to join these fields?
I can go first, Sondra. Couple of things come to mind for me. One, I just reiterate the importance for our field. Again, I think we need to embody the communities that we want to see at our own organization and in our own programs. So that's for me why it's important to make sure we're promoting all kinds of equity within our workplaces. Two, a theme that Erica was particularly touching on earlier was this idea of early and this idea of priming. So when you're a female entering a workplace that is predominantly male, it's very intimidating. And even deep in your subconscious, you know that you don't quite fit here. And so what sort of warning, literally, do we need to give to women, racial minorities, when entering a workplace? And how do we do that in a really encouraging way? So, you talked about STEM careers and the idea that people already didn't feel that was a table for them. So how do we go to them before they have that reaction and say, this is a table for you and we want you here? And I think we can do that as an adults. I think we can do that as children. And Erica also mentioned math. That would be my last tidbit of plea for the group. I think that's true no matter the profession. And I saw a chat in from Christine that one of the reasons perhaps that women aren't in higher level CEO positions in our field is because they don't have a business background. So I would think about how even in economic development, you can obtain more of those business-based skills. Have you signed up to do something with fundraising and financials? Or are you always doing something that's relationship building, event planning, marketing? Expand your skill sets and don't be shy to do that. And then I think we as women need to encourage each other to take on that challenge.
I can go next. I have a slightly different take because I 100% agree with Abby, and I'm going to go in a different direction. So we talked about the individual responsibility, which is what I think the theme for Abby's comments. I'm going to switch it up and go, you know, if companies are going to talk the equity game, if they're going to talk it publicly, they also need to talk with their pocketbooks. And at the end of the day, even we can do research and get information on what our peers theoretically are getting paid, but just culturally, we're not going to know, right, what other folks are getting paid. We need to ask for more as a rule. Women tend not to, like men go into the end when they get that job offer and the negotiations have just begun. Women just say, thank you. That needs to stop right away. So that's part of it. But the flip side of that is for the companies who, as I said, are saying yes to equity, periodically take a look at what you're paying folks and see if the numbers that are shown in this report are playing out in your own organization. I thought about what Sarah Nash said last week at Novagard, and they're actively looking at that and being proactive to make sure that there isn't such a huge gap among their folks, that they are actively looking to promote from within and looking at diversity, not just of thought, but ethnic women, looking at that strategically, because if you don't do it proactively, we will literally be having this conversation again over the next 40 years. It will happen. So there's a corporate responsibility and an individual responsibility, but we can make immediate strides if organizations proactively look at this.
I think you guys have both probably made most of the points that I would make, so great. But I would say, again, awareness. Like, I knew that I wanted to help people and I knew that I wanted to help the region, but I never knew that meant economic development. You know, I thought that could have meant social work. It could have meant teaching. There were a lot of different options, and it took me a while to find the right fit. And then also the other thing that goes along with kind of women just asking for, you know, more money or for a different job title is I've read a study that said men will apply for a job if they have 1 out of 10 qualifications for the job, but women will only apply for the job if they have 10 out of 10 qualifications, not if they have 9 of them. So that's another thing that just needs to stop. So that's one thing I like to encourage is just go for it. Let the employer decide if you're the right person or not. You shouldn't make that decision. If you are interested, then go for it.
Sondra, we've got a question here in the chat that I think is critical to address. Natasha's bringing up the intersectionality of race and gender. And it's a very strong question. I think that we have a tendency to dance around. But here it is. I want to put it out. Are we to the point of comfortably acknowledging that although we are slowly approaching the point of women being more included, why is it that Black and Latinas are still rare in the profession? And so she's not restating what the issue is. She's asking why. What are some of your thoughts as to why this continues to exist, the intersectionality of race and gender?
I have a couple thoughts. And it would mostly be around culture. That's really all that I can speak of. The economic development and corporate culture is, I think, very rigid. There are certain expectations of how you should act or what you should do, and how you should dress, especially, that I think are pretty exclusive. And while having a lot of role model representation and seeing women or men from any specific background in that role is very powerful, which is why Erica's point on talking to young women and helping them see that this is for them is important. But I do also think that there are people who don't come into economic development professions because you have to act a certain way, and that is it's like politics. It's playing a specific role in a specific game to achieve certain outcomes. So those are my 2 cents.
I agree. There's a cultural aspect, but then candidly, this goes back to the systemic issues. One of the interesting things coming out of the 1960s revolution for women was that you started to see more women. I talked with my dad when he was growing up, thinking about that Vietnam period. As he started entering the workforce, one of the outcomes was he was still the only Black guy, but you started to see more women in the meetings with him. And that generation of women, specifically white women, you've seen more and more women progress. The problem is they're still not progressing all the way to the top, but there are more of them. There was never that same inflection point for African Americans or just brown people, Latinos, et cetera. And so we're still not seeing high numbers of people of color in these positions, including economic development. On the flip side, I bet you if you went and looked at the racial numbers from a service industry perspective, there's certain, we look at the number of healthcare workers, big proportion of them are going to be brown women. So there's certain sectors that gravitate towards and then just certain not. And it's a level of encouragement, it's a level of welcome, it's a level of education. There's some huge other issues that are creating this barrier. Once again, it's a matter of acknowledgement, starting early and having this conversation. So.
Yeah, Renee, if we've addressed all the questions in the Q&A, I'd like to thank our panelists very much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Abby, Erica, Camille, Sondra. All three of you had a beautiful roar this morning that made a beautiful melody to all those who are on the line today. The issue of gender and equity and systemic equity is a very not an easy topic, and many degrees by which requires research and understanding to go deep. It is a very convoluted construct of many things, but I encourage all those who have joined today, if you are a woman or a male, that you mentor, you sponsor, you support other women in the economic development field of any color, shade, or whatever, to make them great women to roar as these women have did today on this call. Thank you for attending. And until we meet again, we are 10 o'clock on the dot. Have a great week.
Thanks, Renee.